Is it likely that Donald Trump was fully aware and had every intent of working with Russia to help make sure that he could win the presidency at all costs?
And so I would rather not answer that specific question, other than just to tell you that Mr. Trump's desire to win would have him work with anyone.
That, of course, is a man who needs no introduction. President Trump's former attorney, fixer Michael Cohen, in the middle of a 7-hour day, I believe it was 7 hours, of public testimony on Wednesday, and he ain't done yet. Cohen will start his third straight day of face-to-face questioning with lawmakers in about 15 minutes. Today will be private. He arrived for a hearing just a few minutes ago. It will be, as I mentioned, behind closed doors, so we're not going to get the kind of fireworks we saw yesterday. And this wasn't just must-see TV in the U.S. It was must-see TV in Vietnam as well. No surprise, where the president weighed in just a few hours ago. Here's what he had to say.
I mean, he lied about so many different things, and I was actually impressed that he didn't say, well, I think there was collusion for this reason or that. He didn't say that. He said no collusion, and I was a little impressed by that, frankly. He could have gone all out. He only won about 95% instead of 100%.
Noah Rothman, Mark Thompson back with me. Okay, Noah, what do you make of the president's argument? Michael Cohen was honest about one particular thing, but everything else, liar, liar, liar.
Yeah. So from the president's perspective, everything that Mike Cohen said about the dossier was great. He pretty much shot down every angle that involved Mike Cohen in the dossier. Good for him. At the same time, he sort of put the Trump Organization in the dock for a lot of actions that could be considered illegal, notably among them tax fraud, which he implicated the chief attorney of the Trump Organization in. And if there's corroboration there, the president and the people around the president and his family could be in very serious legal jeopardy if the president doesn't win re-election, but his family could be in legal jeopardy today. That's all sort of hard to see whether that moves forward, because again, you need to have some sort of corroboration, and it's tough to see where Mike Cohen gets that from. Alan Weisselberg is cooperating with Robert Mueller. Maybe Robert Mueller has this. But we understand he's cooperating. I don't think he has any sort of is fearing prosecution for himself, but he may be. I don't know. We don't know a whole lot of what Robert Mueller has, but
we do know that Weisselberg knows a lot.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. We just don't know what he knows. So I'm hesitant to speculate beyond what we already know. Mike Cohen says this. It's really just he said, she said at this point. We'll see what Robert Mueller says when the report comes out.
Marco, I want to share what Republicans said yesterday when they had an opportunity to speak and ask questions. We got a little bit of a mashup for you.
Okay. Fraudster, a cheat, convicted felon, and in 2 months a federal inmate.
He's going to prison for lying to Congress, and he's the star witness to Congress.
You're a pathological liar. A convicted liar, lying to Congress, a criminal.
Okie doke. Did Republicans, listen, they took their time to call Michael Cohen a liar, which we know he is. He's going to jail. Did they miss an opportunity to actually defend President Trump against the allegations? Because I actually didn't hear much of that.
No, and they missed that opportunity with actual specifics. But obviously they're
not by accident.
Right, of course, but they're playing to their audience back home watching on C-SPAN or Fox or what have you, because all of them are afraid of being primary. Let's be clear about that. That's the political move.
But then wouldn't defending the president be the right move?
If you can't defend him. I mean, what Michael Cohen said on yesterday, if what John Dean articulated before Congress was a cancer on the presidency, Michael Cohen articulated a mushroom cloud. This was a devastating testimony. He brought receipts, canceled checks. He was asked questions about financial matters that weren't even necessarily in his opening statement, but that he corroborated, questions that were raised by Democrats with regards to Trump's taxes and what have you. So this just opens the door for more and more investigation on the part of House Democrats. We don't know what Mueller is already looking into. And frankly, I don't think this should just be treated matter-of-factly. This is major. The president is a criminal. That's all there is to it. And if he's writing checks from behind that Oval Office desk, outside of the auspices of the FEC.
Mark, he's not a convicted criminal. He's not.
He's not convicted, but he's still a criminal. I mean, you have to be convicted to be considered a criminal.
I mean, I think it's tough to make the argument the president of the United States is a criminal. We know that the president is a liar, but to say that the president is a criminal.
Well, if you are paying off someone to benefit your campaign outside of Federal Election Commission filings, that's not an act of criminality?
Noah, what do you think?
Well, it would be if it is proven in a court of law, and if there was a conviction, then you can say criminal. But until such time, you can say that suspected or even alleged, although alleged isn't even appropriate.
In this political discourse, when Hillary Clinton was criminalized every single day of that campaign, and still is, they have rallies saying lock her up.
Fair point.
We're going to be polite.
Well, that was grotesque and negligent.
I'm sorry?
So the response to grotesque negligence isn't to be negligent ourselves, right?
All right, you lost me.
His point is, like, he's getting on the when they go low, we go high. What they have done to Hillary Clinton,
Well, it's factually inaccurate.
It's factually inaccurate, and it's awful. So should we match that?
Well, there was never any foundation for any of that. We have a special counsel.
That's doing his job.
A
So we could
special
say,
counsel would not take all this time and bring forward all these indictments for someone who's not doing anything.
Right.
All these people work for him. He knows them. He followed their direction. He even said that the President of the United States suborned perjury. Bill Clinton was impeached for perjury. If he has asked several people to lie to grand juries and to Congress, there's several counts of perjury. So I don't know, really. I mean, frankly,
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
I'm just saying then we invite the Department of Justice to take action. We know that Michael Cohen is going to jail, and we can have our beliefs about the president.
Yeah, what he said, unfortunately, for people who want this president to be impeached, was not that he suborned perjury. He didn't explicitly do that. What he said was there was an implicit wink and nod, and I interpreted that to mean I should lie to Congress. Now, do I believe that the president wanted Mike Cohen to lie to Congress? I sure do. Did the president tell Mike Cohen to lie to Congress? Nope, not according to Mike Cohen, and that is what would be actionable. You can't say that, okay, well, there's some implicit wink and nod here that we can see that as an impeachable offense, because then you're establishing a new precedent that would apply to literally every single president moving forward because it's so malleable.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.